I was 13 when I learned that a name can be heavier than a suitcase. My mother used to whisper mine like a prayer, soft and chipped at the edges, the way people handle fragile things. Then, one winter, she rewrote it, bent it, pressed it flat against a false birth date and a border that didn't want either of us. She carried the forged papers inside her coat, close to the heart she claimed was stronger than any checkpoint. I never saw her cross. They told me she was caught somewhere between the final Polish guardhouse and the first glare of German floodlights. They told me she didn't scream, didn't run, didn't even curse, just pressed her fingertips against the forged name, her name on my future, and whispered something the officer couldn't hear. But I did. I still hear it every time my stamp hits someone else's passport decades later. Go. The word is small, almost nothing, but inside it lives the sound of her breath, the tremble of her fear, and the weight of the sacrifice that made me a man without a country, raised on a lie I never asked for. And now I'm the one who checks papers. I used to believe that borders were clean things, lines drawn with rulers by people who never touched the mud of the places they divided. When I was a boy, I imagined them as thin streaks of chalk, the kind teachers dragged across the blackboard, leaving dust on their sleeves. In my mind, borders were quiet, obedient. They stayed where you put them. But real borders breathe. They listen. They wait for you to make a mistake. I learned that long before I wore the uniform. My earliest memories are of my mother's handwriting, sharp, slanted, deliberate. She wrote like someone who knew ink could betray you if you weren't careful. I didn't understand why she practiced her signature over and over in the evenings, why she whispered syllables under her breath as if testing their weight. I thought adults simply liked repetition. I thought survival was just something everyone did absent-mindedly. At home, she worked as a seamstress, the kind who repaired coats rather than stitched new ones. She would turn wool between her fingers and say, "Borders are everywhere, Dziecko, even inside fabric. You pull too hard, the whole thing comes apart." She meant the country. She meant life. I didn't know that yet. I grew up in a neighborhood where every window carried two stories, the official one and the one told in lowered voices over weak tea. My mother was good at the second kind. She had a talent for silence, not the empty kind, but the kind that holds something behind it. She could tuck grief into the corners of a room so neatly that guests never noticed. Back then, my job was simple. Be good. Good children do not ask why their mothers tense at the sound of boots on stairs. Good children do not count the days since they last saw their father. Good children do not question why the kitchen drawer holds more documents than cutlery. And I was very good. When I talk about the work I do now, checking papers, verifying origins, confirming identities, people assume I chose this path out of patriotism or discipline or the hunger for a steady wage. They never guess the truth. I chose it because I needed the world to make sense. Rules are addictive when you grow up in chaos. Authority is intoxicating when your childhood ran on whispers. And nothing feels safer than a stamp, a small, clean sound that decides something. The first time I saw a border post, I was 8. My mother held my hand so tightly my knuckles whitened. The guards barely looked at us, but she stared straight ahead as if eye contact could cost her everything. I remember thinking she looked like a woman walking across ice. One wrong step, and the whole lake might crack open. "Why are we scared?" I whispered. "We're not," she said, but her voice had the same tightness as the seams she stitched at night. That was the moment I understood. Borders are not drawn lines. They are thresholds that judge you. And even when you're allowed to pass, you feel the weight of having been measured. As a teenager, I discovered I had a talent my mother lacked: stillness. Teachers said I had an eye for details. I noticed when someone's accent slipped between words, when a date didn't align with a story, when an absence felt too sharp to be innocent. I carried these observations like loose coins, small, insignificant, but comforting. They made the world readable, predictable. My mother never commented on it, though I caught her watching me sometimes, a mixture of pride and something softer, sadder. She never admitted she was preparing me for a world that would scrutinize every part of who we were. She just trained me in silence. She taught me how to fold documents so the crease hid the most fragile parts, how to speak with certainty even when you were terrified, how to pack a bag fast but not carelessly, and how to walk through a checkpoint without looking back. "If you look back," she told me once, "they will look at you twice." I didn't understand the warning until much later, when I became one of the men who did look twice. People assume officers enjoy suspicion. They think we thrive on catching lies. But the truth is simpler. Patterns soothe us. Tiny inconsistencies disturb us. A trembling hand, a mismatched date, a story told too smoothly. We feel these things. They enter the bloodstream like static. By the time I joined the Border Service, I had perfected the art of neutrality. I became the kind of officer who never raised his voice, never joked during inspections, never rushed. My colleagues thought I was calm. In reality, I was terrified, not of the people I screened, but of becoming the kind of man who would have stopped my mother without hesitation. In training, they told us the job required emotional distance. I was good at that. Too good. When the senior officer placed the first practice passport in front of me, I felt a strange thrum in my chest, the feeling of holding another person's future in my hands. It should have felt heavy. It didn't. Not then. The first time I lifted the stamp, the wooden handle warm from countless palms, I hesitated only a second. Then I pressed down. A clean impact, a small sound. Authority in a single beat. Something inside me steadied, something inside me hardened. I didn't know I had just stepped onto the path that would lead me back to my mother, not through memory, but through guilt. Borders shape you. Sometimes they split you, and sometimes, without meaning to, you grow into the very gate that once denied someone you loved. I just didn't know it yet. I used to think the story began with me, with my uniform, with the stamp in my hand. But every descent has an earlier beginning, and mine started long before I was old enough to understand the word illegal, long before I learned how ink can damn or deliver. It began with my mother, with the woman who carried winter inside her coat and hope folded into forged documents. I didn't know the full truth until years later, but the fragments lived in me, the tension in her jaw, the way she counted coins twice, the nights she worked by candlelight even when the electricity returned. Poverty wasn't new in Poland, not then, but desperation, that particular quiet maternal desperation, that was different, that was personal. My mother never called it hunger. She never said, "We don't have enough." She said things like, "We'll stretch it. Winter is almost over. God asks only what we can endure." But I saw how she scraped the bottom of the flour tin, how she saved scraps of fabric the size of postage stamps, how she bartered her stitching for vegetables and favors. When the factories in our district closed, the men drank more and the women slept less. Everybody planned to leave: Germany, France, anywhere with wages not paid in promises. Crossing legally required paperwork our neighbors joked was harder to get than miracles. My mother understood this better than most. She never trusted systems built by people who'd forgotten their own beginnings. She used to say, "Borders are not walls, they are stories, so you must learn to tell one." I didn't realize then that she wasn't teaching me philosophy. She was preparing me. The German border was a rumor in our neighborhood, a thin, seductive line between struggle and something close to dignity. People whispered about it like sinners whisper about forbidden fruit. A job across the border meant real pay, real bread, real heat in the winter, not the illusion of warmth created by boiling water on the stove. My mother never confessed her plans. She didn't have to. I watched her hands change. The way she touched paper became reverent, almost fearful. She began writing at night, practicing loops and lines with unnatural precision. Once I woke to find her burning something in the sink: scraps of handwriting, half-formed signatures, dates she had crossed out so many times the ink bled. "Go back to bed," she whispered. But there was a tremor in her voice, the kind that comes when someone crosses a moral boundary inside themselves. Adults think children don't feel these things, but they do. I did. Polish mothers are raised on sacrifice. The saints, the martyrs, the quiet women who endure, these are our archetypes. But they are also raised on secrets, on making something from nothing, on bending rules because rules were never made for women like them. Catholic virtue teaches humility and obedience. Reality demands cunning and courage. My mother lived in the tension between the two. Her virtue told her, "Stay." Her circumstances told her, "Run." Her child told her, without meaning to, "Choose." And she did. She chose to leave. She chose to forge papers. She chose to risk herself so I could have more than the future she feared for me. Some people call that sin. Others call it survival. I don't know if she saw a difference. I overheard the plan by accident. Two women murmuring in the kitchen, the way people speak when the door is closed, but hope is open just a crack. "You'll need a new name," one said. "One that can cross. And the boy? He must follow later. It's safer." Safer. Nothing about this was safe. My mother's voice was thin, tight. "He needs to cross, not me. That's not how it works." "Then I'll make it work." Those words, "I'll make it work," became a kind of anthem in our home. She said them when the pipes froze, when the landlord raised rent, when a factory worker was beaten for protesting. She said them the way some people say prayers. But forging an identity is not a prayer. It is a temptation, the temptation to rewrite fate. She didn't do it for greed. She did it for me. But temptation doesn't care about motives. It only cares about the moment you cross the threshold. As a child, I didn't know the weight of a passport, but I knew the weight of fear. When my mother told me I would travel with "a name that keeps you safe," I thought she meant a saint's name, a protective charm. I didn't understand she meant her name, the one she planned to surrender like a relic. "You will walk through the gate," she told me, kneeling to button my coat, "and they will believe you." "Why won't they believe you?" I asked. She didn't answer. Some questions are too sharp for a mother to touch. Over the following weeks, she drilled me gently, lovingly, desperately. "When is your birthday? What town were you born in? What is your mother's maiden name?" Each answer was wrong. Each answer was necessary. Each answer stole a piece of the truth I had known. I didn't realize she was teaching me the craft I would one day police. Every state creates rules to protect itself, but rules, like borders, have blind spots. Back then, the checkpoints relied on human judgment more than digital records. Documents were inspected by tired officers with overworked eyes. Names were verified by instinct as much as by procedure. People forged papers because the system made honesty impossible. And my mother, who stitched torn coats and reattached buttons more carefully than some doctors replaced sutures, understood paper the way she understood fabric. She knew where to crease it, where to soften the edges, how to mimic the slight weight of official ink, how to create a signature that looked born, not made. Her forgery wasn't sloppy or desperate. It was art. Art made from fear, and that is the most dangerous kind. There are moments that echo long after they end. This was one. She woke me before dawn. I smelled winter on her coat, like she had walked through the season itself. Her eyes were bright, too bright, the kind of brightness that means something is breaking. "Listen to me," she whispered. "Once you cross, don't look back. Will you be behind me?" Yes. It was the first lie she ever told me intentionally. It was also the last. The walk to the border felt like a funeral march disguised as a journey. She held my shoulder, guiding me with gentle pressure. At the checkpoint, she knelt, fixed my scarf, and touched my cheek with cold fingers. "You are brave," she said. "I'm scared. That's part of bravery." Her hands shook only once, when she placed the forged papers in my coat. Her own copy, her own forged identity, was hidden deeper inside her clothing. I didn't know then that officers often check adults more thoroughly. I didn't know then that children traveling alone are sometimes waved through because no one believes parents will send them unaccompanied. I didn't know then how wrong that belief can be. But my mother knew. She kissed my forehead. "Go." One word, sharp as frost, soft as breath. I stepped forward, and she did not. People tell stories about dramatic arrests, shouting, running, guns. But the truth is quieter, more suffocating. I reached the officer's window. He studied my papers, suspicious, then surprisingly gentle. "Traveling alone?" I nodded. He hesitated. Children complicate bureaucracy. They also soften it. He waved me through. But when I turned, a small, instinctive movement, I saw a cluster of guards behind my mother. They weren't violent. They weren't shouting. They were simply encircling her, asking questions she couldn't answer truthfully. She looked at me, not with terror, not with regret, with certainty. "Go." Her lips moved, though no sound reached me. The same word, the same command, the same love. A guard stepped between us, and she disappeared into the machinery of the state. I crossed. She didn't. That was the last border we shared. People think temptation is only about pleasure, wealth, lust, power. But sometimes temptation is inheritance. I grew into adulthood shaped by her choice, the temptation to control what she could not, the temptation to enforce what destroyed her, the temptation to become the gatekeeper she could not pass. And later, when I stood at the officer's desk, lifting the stamp that would decide other people's stories, I felt something strange. Not pride, not justice, not safety. I felt the echo of her voice. Go. But whose freedom was I protecting? Whose story was I denying? Whose mother was I stopping? That question would come for me sooner than I was prepared for. Power doesn't arrive with a roar. It arrives with a stamp. A small block of wood, a rubber seal, a clean, decisive sound. Thok. The first time I heard it as an officer, truly heard it, something opened inside me. something sharp, something hungry. I didn't recognize it as indulgence at first. I told myself it was discipline, duty, control. But every addiction begins with a lie that feels like order. There's a moment, every officer knows it, when the traveler looks at you before you look at them. Their eyes flicker with hope, fear, guilt, desperation, boredom. And you get to decide which emotion survives. My booth was a glass box, a cage, a throne. People slid documents toward me with trembling fingers, or arrogant ones, or resigned ones. I watched the micro-expressions that betray everything before a passport is even opened. A raised brow, a twitch at the corner of the mouth, a breath held too long. I could smell fear the way a butcher smells fresh meat, metallic, immediate. This was not the kind of man my mother raised, but it was the kind of man the border created. At first, I told myself I was simply doing my job well. Then I began to enjoy being the obstacle, the test, the gate. Every time I stamped a document, the world bent slightly around my approval. Go, denied. Wait, next. 4 simple rhythms, a power hymn. Rules can become intoxicating when your childhood was chaos. Uniforms can become armor when your past was fragile. Authority can become a drug when the person you loved most died trying to outrun it. I didn't realize that I was feeding something inside myself, something starved, something angry. A part of me that still stood on that border as a child, watching my mother taken by the same force I now embodied. But addiction doesn't announce itself. It whispers. You deserve control. You survived. You earned this. I believed it. One winter morning, a man approached my booth. His hands shook, not from cold, from guilt. I didn't know what he had done, but he carried it like a brick pressed against his ribs. He slid his passport forward. I didn't even open it. Step aside, I said. My voice was too steady, too calm. It thrilled me. He swallowed. Is something wrong? Protocol. I let him wait 10 minutes. Unnecessary, cruel, exhilarating. It was the first time I felt pleasure from withholding permission. When I finally stamped his passport and waved him through, there it was again. Thok. A clean sound, a satisfying sound, a dangerous sound. His gratitude disgusted me. His relief delighted me. I felt my heartbeat in my fingertips. Something had shifted. I stepped outside during my break, lit a cigarette I didn't even want, and let the smoke burn my throat. Not for pleasure, for grounding. But the truth was simple. I had crossed a line, and for the first time, I didn't look back. People think borders are patrolled with guns, but the real weapon is paper, a name, a date, a birthplace. With a flick of my wrist, I could deny someone's wedding, someone's funeral, someone's return to the only home they'd ever known. I could unravel relationships, redirect destinies, suspend hope. And God help me, I enjoyed it. Not always, not consciously, but I began to savor the moment before judgment, the silence where someone's whole life hung on my next movement. It was a kind of intimacy, twisted, yes, but intimate, like the pause before a lover's confession, but colder, sharper. Most indulgences come wrapped in chaos: alcohol, gambling, the warmth of someone you shouldn't touch. Mine came wrapped in order. I sharpened my instincts the way drunks sharpen cravings. I studied every kind of lie, not because I wanted to catch people, but because I wanted to feel the rush of being right. When colleagues invited me for drinks after shifts, I refused. Not out of integrity, out of obsession. I stayed in my booth, asked for overtime, reviewed documents until the details blurred. My uniform smelled of paper and ink. My fingers were stained with authority. I told myself I was becoming efficient. In truth, I was becoming numb. Numbness masquerades as discipline. It masquerades as strength. It masquerades as justice. But it's none of those things. It's decay. The first real descent happened on a Friday night. A young woman stepped to my window. Nervous smile, trembling hands, a forged signature just slightly off. Something about her reminded me of my mother, the way fear pulled at the corners of her mouth, the way hope flickered beneath guilt. I should have let her pass. I should have looked away. I should have remembered the woman who gave me everything by breaking the rules. But I didn't. I leaned forward. "Where are you going?" Her voice cracked. "To my sister." "Your papers don't agree." She said nothing. She looked like she might cry. And then, a moment I am ashamed to remember, I felt it. The old thrill, the pulse of power, the warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with justice. I had become the man I once feared, the man who swallowed my mother's future. I stamped her papers harder than necessary. Denied. Her face collapsed. My chest surged. She walked away. I didn't. Inside my head, my mother's voice whispered the word she had given me as salvation: go. But I had forgotten how to listen. After that night, the slide grew steeper. I stopped seeing travelers as people. They became puzzles, threats, entertainment. A man with a false date of birth? Easy. A woman traveling alone with a suspicious story? Predictable. A migrant clutching crumpled documents, praying silently for mercy? Routine. Each encounter fed a hunger I didn't want to acknowledge. The hunger to be the one who decides, to control the narrative, to rewrite stories the way my mother once rewrote my name. But she rewrote mine to save me. I rewrote others to feel powerful. This was the fracture, the moral break, the indulgence of the soul. I went home exhausted but wired. I slept but shallowly. I woke wanting more. Not money, not pleasure, not fame. Control. Looking back, I think a part of me was punishing the world, punishing the system, punishing the border that took her. But mostly, I was punishing myself for crossing without her, for obeying the command she gave me, for surviving something she couldn't. Survivor's guilt is a quiet poison. It doesn't kill you, it corrodes you. Each stamp felt like reclaiming something stolen. Each denied passage felt like evening a score I couldn't articulate. I didn't realize I was reenacting the moment of her capture, but reversed. This time, I was the one with the power. This time, I could stop someone else. This time, I could be the border. It was intoxicating. It was monstrous. It was mine. Some nights, after the last traveler had passed, I would sit alone in the booth. No noise, no movement, just the echo of stamps and footsteps fading into darkness. That's when I heard it most clearly. Go. My mother's voice, not accusing, not pleading, just present, like a warning, or a reminder, or a plea. But by then, I was too deep in the indulgence to stop. I mistook her mercy for permission. I mistook her love for authority. And the border, the one she couldn't cross, began to live inside me. Collapse never begins with a scream. It begins with a pause, A hesitation so small you almost miss it. A word held too long on the tongue. A heartbeat that misfires in the middle of a decision you've made 1,000 times. For me, it began on an ordinary Thursday, cold, gray, unremarkable, until he stepped into my line. He looked like every other traveler, tired, hunched, carrying a bag whose straps had been mended more than once. Nothing about him screamed danger. Nothing about him suggested he was the person who would pry open everything I had tried to bury. His passport slid under the glass with a soft scrape. When I opened it, my breath snagged. The name printed there, the forged one, the altered one, was the same name my mother had once whispered into my coat when she sent me across the border. Her name, her sacrifice, her sin, her hope. It wasn't the same person. It wasn't even the same handwriting, but the letters. God. The letters were the same shape as the ones she practiced in the dark. A cold wave hit me so sharply my fingernails tingled. The man cleared his throat. Is something wrong? For the first time in years, I didn't know how to speak. Memory doesn't return gently. It slams. In that instant, I wasn't an officer. I was a boy in a too large coat, standing at a border that swallowed my mother. I saw her hands, ink-stained, trembling. I heard her soft voice, "Go." I felt the cold morning when she was taken, as if frost had climbed back into my bones after decades. And now, that name, her name, stared at me from the document I held. I dropped it. Literally. My fingers failed me. The man jumped. "Sir?" I should have waved him through, but indulgence had hollowed me out, and now fear was filling the space. My voice cracked. "Step aside." He obeyed. People always obey the uniform. I handed the passport to my colleague, muttering something about secondary checks, but my ears rang too loudly to hear my own lie. I stepped outside for air. The sky was colorless. So was I. I thought I could shake it off. One memory shouldn't unravel a man, but guilt isn't logical. It's a parasite. When stirred, it claws its way upward. The next traveler approached. I stared at their passport photo and couldn't understand the face. I read the name, and it blurred. My pulse stuttered. My hands shook. I stamped the document, but the sound was wrong. It echoed, accusing, hollow, thuck, like a coffin lid closing. I tried to continue, but each stamp grew heavier. Each face reminded me of hers. Each question tasted like betrayal. A colleague noticed. "Everything all right, officer?" I nodded. I lied. The truth? I was splintering. The next day was worse. A young mother approached. A toddler clung to her hip. Their papers were authentic, flawless. But when the child reached toward me with a sticky hand, smiling the way only children do when they trust strangers, my chest seized. My mother had touched my cheek once before sending me across. Her hand had been cold. This child's was warm. The contrast carved me open. "Are we okay to pass?" the woman asked. I couldn't answer, not right away. She frowned. "Sir?" My breath hitched. I stamped their passports with a trembling hand. Thuck. The mother thanked me. I didn't deserve it. She walked away, and I felt something inside me, something I had built from years of discipline, authority, and denial, tilt dangerously. The booth suddenly felt too small, too bright, too loud. Every rustle of paper was a scream. Every stamp was a gunshot. I excused myself, ran to the bathroom, locked the door. Then I slid down the wall, uniforms scraping the tiles, and pressed both hands to my face. Something was breaking, something I could no longer hold. I returned home that evening and sat in the dark. Didn't cook, didn't undress, didn't move. I stared at my hands. Hands that once held my mother's forged papers. Hands that now stamped judgment onto strangers without hesitation. The truth I had avoided for years rose like floodwater. I had become the border she died trying to cross. I should have quit then, resigned, confessed. But collapse is slow. Cowardice is slower. Instead, I returned the next morning, took my place behind the glass, pretended the ground wasn't falling. Late afternoon, my shift nearly finished. The man with my mother's forged name returned, escorted by 2 officers. He'd been flagged for inconsistencies. Secondary checks failed to clear him. His face was pale now, eyes wide, sweat along his temple. Fear. The same fear I once saw in my mother as guards closed in. "I told them everything," he said, voice cracking. "I'm visiting my cousin, I swear." I looked at him, really looked. He was just a man trying to cross a line, trying to get from one life to another, trying to survive, like her. My throat tightened so hard I nearly gagged. My colleague asked, "Officer, should we detain him?" The man stared at me, silently begging. The room tilted. My hands went numb. This was the moment, the one that would decide whether I was my mother's son or the state's. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Not mercy, not justice, not even breath. The silence stretched. My colleague tapped the folder. "Sir?" My pulse pounded like fists on a door. I tried again. Still nothing. I was frozen, held hostage by my own guilt. Finally, my colleague sighed. "Tighten it. Let's move him for processing." Processing. A polite word for what broke my mother. The man was led away. I said nothing. I did nothing. I collapsed in plain sight, and no one noticed. That night, I drank for the first time in years. Not to celebrate, to forget. But alcohol doesn't erase guilt. It only distorts it. I dreamed of my mother, not as she was, but as she might have been if she had lived. Older, tired, watching me through the glass of my booth. She didn't speak in the dream. She didn't have to. Her absence was a wound. When I woke, my pillow was damp. I didn't know if it was sweat or guilt or both. Maybe it doesn't matter. The next morning, I sat in the booth but couldn't perform even the simplest task. Every document shook in my hands. Every name blurred. Every face carried a shadow of hers. My colleague leaned toward me. "You're off today. Go home." He said it kindly, too kindly. And that broke me harder than cruelty ever could. I stood, my legs barely held. I walked out of the checkpoint, not quickly, not dramatically, just slowly, like a man walking out of a life he no longer recognized. Outside, the cold slapped me. The border lights flickered in the distance. Travelers moved past me, unaware that I was shattering quietly among them. For the first time since I was a boy, I whispered aloud, "I'm sorry." I didn't know if I meant my mother, the man, or myself. Maybe all three. When I finally reached my apartment, I opened the drawer where I kept my childhood documents, and there it was, the original forged paper, my mother's handwriting, the name she gave me so I could cross. I touched it, fingertips trembling. The ink felt warm, though it shouldn't. My throat tightened. Then I heard it, clearer than ever. Go. Not an order, not a blessing, not a memory, a question. A question I didn't know how to answer. The paper shook in my hands, and I finally broke. Confession isn't loud. It's not shouted in a church or whispered into a priest's ear. It begins in the chest, a tightening, a crack, a truth pushing upward like a bruise rising under the skin. For me, confession arrived the night I couldn't breathe. After the border broke me open, I stayed inside my apartment for hours, maybe days. Time bent strangely, like it didn't want to look at me directly. I sat at the table, the forged paper in front of me. My mother's handwriting leaned slightly left, the way it always did when she was frightened. Her signature, the false version, trembled at the end of the last letter. I traced it with my finger, the loops, the pressure points, the hesitation. The paper was a map of her fear, a map of her love, a map of the path she walked so I could continue mine. I had spent my entire adulthood pretending this piece of paper didn't define me, but it did. It shaped me more than any document I had ever stamped. I realized then I had never confessed this story, Not to anyone, not even to myself. I had built my life on silence, just as she had. But silence is not strength. Silence is a room that slowly fills with water, and I was drowning. I closed my eyes and let the memories come. Not the sharp, painful ones from the day she was taken, but the ones I had buried so deeply I forgot they were still alive. Her laughter, her humming while she stitched, the way she tucked stray hairs behind her ear when concentrating, the way she squeezed my shoulder 3 times whenever she felt afraid, her secret signal meaning, I am here, I am trying, I am yours. I forced myself to imagine her last hours, not to torture myself, but to finally understand the scale of her courage. She must have woken early, hours before the sky, packed the forged papers with trembling hands, prayed, even though she never admitted she prayed, touched the doorframe on her way out, the way she always did, walked with me to the border, knowing she might not return. Was she cold? Did she hesitate? Did she want to turn back? I will never know. The border stole those answers. But I knew this. She crossed a moral line long before she reached the physical one, and she did it for me. All I had done with that legacy was become the thing she feared most. The confession rose in my throat, thick, bitter, necessary. I'm sorry, I whispered again. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was a beginning. Guilt is not a weight you carry. It's a story you repeat until it owns you. All my life, I believed rules were safety, that order was virtue, that borders were truth. But I was only trying to fill the space her absence left. A space shaped like a mother's hand letting go too soon. Her disappearance became a wound I tried to cauterize with authority. Each stamp, each decision, each denial was me rewriting the moment she was taken. This time, I am the one in control. This time, I will not be powerless. This time, no one will disappear without my consent. But control is not healing. Control is armor over a broken bone, and eventually, the fracture returns. When I held her forged papers again, I felt the wound reopen, not violently, but tenderly, as if grief were finally tired of being ignored. I whispered, I crossed because of you. I became this because of you. I destroyed parts of myself trying to protect what you gave me. The confession hurt. But pain was honesty. Honesty was oxygen. For the first time in years, I breathed deeply. As night sank into the apartment, I felt her presence. Not supernatural, but emotional, like the echo of a voice in a long hallway. I remembered something I hadn't thought about in decades. The night before the crossing, when she reheated soup and pretended not to cry, I asked her, Mama, are you afraid of the guards? She smiled, small, tired. No, I'm afraid of losing you. I had forgotten that. How could I have? She wasn't trying to beat the border. She was trying to save me. And I had spent my adulthood defending the very system that took her. The contradiction shattered me. But it also softened me. I whispered into the quiet, I forgive you. My voice cracked, then softer, trembling. Please, forgive me. I didn't expect an answer. I didn't receive one. But I felt something quietly shift, as if the air loosened its grip around my chest, as if the memory of her finally allowed me to move. Forgiveness doesn't arrive with a blaze. It arrives like dawn, slow, gentle, almost invisible until you realize the darkness has changed shape. Confession is not just admitting what you've done, it's admitting who you've become. So I said it aloud to the empty room. I became the border. The words tasted like rust, but they were true. Every denial, every suspicion, every withheld mercy, they had been echoes of my own trauma. I wasn't guarding a country. I was guarding a wound. And now the wound had split open. I pressed a hand over my heart, the same spot where my mother once hid my forged papers, and realized something terrifying. I didn't know who I was without duty, without the stamp, without the booth, without the authority that compensated for my grief. But collapse forces rebirth. It strips away the armor. It makes room for something fragile, something honest, something human. I whispered, "What do I do now?" The silence answered in its own way, soft, expectant. Not a command, not a warning, not an echo. A space my mother never had. A space to choose. It happened as I folded the forged paper to put it away. A breath, a memory, a whisper. Go. But it wasn't the command she gave me as a child. This time it felt different. Not go forward blindly, not go on without thinking, not go in obedience or fear. It sounded like, go, change, go, soften, go, become what I could not be. Go. Let my sacrifice mean something other than your suffering. The meaning struck so deeply I bent forward, elbows on the table, forehead pressed to my hands. Tears came, slow and uneven, like someone remembering how to cry. For the first time, the word go didn't hurt. It guided. By midnight, the confession had finished carving its way through me. I wasn't healed. I wasn't redeemed. But I was awake. Deeply awake. I looked at the forged paper one last time, held it gently, as if holding her hand across decades. Then I placed it back in the drawer, not to hide it, but to honor it. Her handwriting, her fear, her love, all of it. I turned off the kitchen light, stood in darkness, let the silence settle around me like a blanket. Then, in a voice barely above breath, I said the only truth that remained. I will not be the border anymore. I lay down on the couch, exhausted, hollowed, strangely calm. But just as sleep settled in, a thought rose, sharp, urgent, unstoppable. I have to face them. The travelers I judged, the people I denied, the system I protected. And most of all, I have to face the man whose papers carried her name. My eyes opened in the dark. The confession was not complete, not yet. I needed to return, not to the authority, to the truth. A revelation flickered, small but fierce. Tomorrow I would go back to the border, not as an officer, but as her son. The air felt electric, trembling, and in that charged silence, her voice echoed one more time. Go. But this time, I finally understood where. Morning came like it always does, indifferent. The city outside my window was the same. Buses groaning awake, shop shutters rattling, someone arguing into a phone on the street below. The world didn't care that something inside me had cracked open during the night. But I cared. For the first time in years, I did not put on my uniform the way a soldier dons armor. I held the shirt in my hands and felt its weight, the stiffness of the fabric, the faint scent of paper and sweat and cheap soap. This time, I understood what it truly was. Not protection, not honor, just cloth. The authority I had wrapped around it was mine, not its. Slowly, deliberately, I dressed. Not as the border, as a man who had watched a border swallow his mother, and then spent decades swallowing others in her name. Today, I told myself, I will go back. but not as before. Walking toward the checkpoint felt like walking into a confession booth. The building loomed ahead, the same glass, the same lines, the same fluorescent hum. My colleagues nodded in greeting, unaware of the war that had taken place inside my chest. "Feeling better?" one asked. I managed a small smile. Yes. It wasn't a lie. Not exactly. Before I could take my post, I went to the internal office, the place where files go when lives are interrupted. It smelled of dust and fatigue. Shelves bowed under the weight of folders. "I need information on a man brought in 2 days ago," I told the clerk. I gave him the name, my mother's name. He frowned, flipped through files, clicked through screens. "Detained," he said. "Questioning ongoing. No final decision yet. Detained. Not free. Not lost. Suspended." I felt both relief and shame. "Can I see him?" I asked. The clerk shrugged. 5 minutes. They led me to a small room. Concrete walls, metal table, 2 chairs. The air was stale, as if no one had opened a window in months. The man sat with his hands folded, wrists unbound but tense. He looked smaller without the noise of the terminal around him. When he saw me, he flinched. "You," he said. "You're the one who—" "Yes." Silence swelled between us. I sat down. The chair screeched, a harsh, ugly sound. "I'm not here to interrogate you," I said quietly. "I needed to see you." Suspicion flickered in his eyes. "Why?" "Because your papers carried my mother's name. Because I chose fear over mercy. Because I have spent my adult life punishing people who look like her." I couldn't say all that. Not yet. "Your case is still open," I said. "There are options." He laughed once, humorless. "Options. That's what you call it?" I didn't defend myself. He was right. "I've done this job a long time," I said. "Too long without asking what it was making of me. The day you came to my window, it forced me to see something I didn't want to see." He looked at me. Really looked. As if trying to decide whether I was mocking him. "You can't just feel bad and expect it to change anything," he murmured. "I know," I swallowed. "I can't promise outcomes, but I can tell the truth in your file. I can write what I actually saw. A man who was scared, yes, but not dangerous. Inconsistent documents, but no sign of harm, no sign of threat." His shoulders sagged. "You would do that?" A strange calm settled over me. Yes, I should have done it that day. We sat there, 2 men on opposite sides of a line neither of us had drawn. "I can't fix what I've been," I said, "but I can decide what I am from now on." He stared at the table, then at me. "Why?" he whispered. "Because of her. Because of you. Because of the word go that will not leave me alone. Because someone once risked everything to send me across a border," I said softly. "And I have spent my life forgetting what that cost." He didn't ask for details. He didn't need them. He just nodded, slowly. 5 minutes passed. The guard knocked. As I stood, the man said quietly, almost reluctantly, "Thank you." I didn't deserve the words, but I accepted them, not as absolution, as acknowledgement. I returned to my booth, the glass, the chair, the familiar stack of passports waiting to be judged. I sat down and placed my hand on the stamp. It felt different now, not like a weapon, not like a throne, like a tool. The first traveler stepped forward, a young man, alone, eyes flickering. His documents were technically in order but rough around the edges, perhaps a rushed application. Perhaps a cousin who filled in the forms. Old me would have tightened the screws, enjoyed the fear, made him sweat. New me, still guilty, still flawed, still learning, took a breath. "Purpose of travel?" "Work," he stammered. "Seasonal. On a farm." I studied his face. Not his fear, his effort.
He had the look of someone who had sold more than he could spare to pay for this chance. I checked the facts. They added up. Enough. My hand hovered over the stamp, and there it was. Go. Her voice. Not as a command this time, but as a blessing I could choose to extend. I pressed down. Thock. The sound no longer felt like a coffin. It felt like a door opening. Next, I said gently. I didn't become a saint overnight. I still caught forged documents. I still flagged dangerous inconsistencies. I still followed rules. But something fundamental had shifted. I stopped asking, "How can I stop you?" and started asking, "Is there a way to let you through without putting others at risk?" I stopped taking pleasure in fear. I stopped stretching my power just to feel its reach. I stopped mistaking control for justice. I also stopped pretending that I was clean. When I reviewed files, I quietly noted where the system was cruel when it could have been cautious instead. When a colleague enjoyed their authority too much, I recognized myself in them, and gently, sometimes clumsily, pushed back. "This one can go," I would say when others hesitated. "We have enough to trust him." Sometimes they listened, sometimes they didn't. But I spoke. That another was different. I didn't leave the job. Running would have felt too much like repeating my old pattern. Another escape, another silence. Instead, I chose the harder thing. To stay. To change inside the machine. To let my mother's sacrifice bend my hand toward mercy. Months later, I checked the system about the man with her name. Released. Conditional entry. Monitored, but free. It wasn't a perfect outcome. It wasn't triumph. But it was life. I closed the file and sat back, exhaling. That night, I went home and opened the drawer. The forged paper lay where I had left it. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I just sat with it. With her. With myself. "I can't undo what they did to you," I said softly, "or what I did to others. But I can make sure that when I hear you say go now, it means go through, not go away." The room felt warm somehow. Not with light, with acceptance. I placed the paper back in the drawer, carefully. Not as evidence, as inheritance. These days, when people slide their documents under my glass, I still feel the old reflex, the desire to control, to judge, to test. But over it, like a thin, steady thread, I feel something else. My bound how my shoulder. Her fear. Her courage. Her whisper. Go. And each time I lift the stamp, I ask myself a simple question. Will this choice honor the woman who broke the law to give me a life, or the fear that broke her? I won't always get it right. I know that.
But I am no longer the boarder that devours people without a second thought. I am a man sitting at a table, holding paper that pretends to define a life, trying, imperfectly, to listen for a mother's voice through the noise of a system that forgot her. The stamp falls. Thock. Go, I say. And for the first time in a very long time, I mean it.